Okay, so on the lower, in order to fit in that semi-auto trigger pack, this took some screwing around. You know, this was a little wonky. This is the part that there's not a whole lot written about it. Either that or it's written and I just can't find it. So there was a lot of trial and error in this part. But let's see if I can do my best. I've also got these two pieces where the pin is. I've got this tack welded in place, that way you can't just take off the lower, the semi-auto lower and put on a full auto lower, that type of thing. This is, again, another one that can't be backwards compatible, so it can't be readily converted. So you'd have to, you know, grind a weld off, all that sort of thing, and whatever. So here is the inside of the lower, right there. And this spot right here is the actual Indianapolis Ordnance semi-auto trigger pack. Now the problem that happens with a lot of these is that the pieces in here fit together so simply that they all like rely on each other in order to interact and function and things like that. So when you go to take out the sear, the way that you drive the spring for this rear latch and the safety don't interface, they don't work anymore. So you got to kind of work around a few things and mess with it, and I'll tell you about that. But this little scallop right here, this is what I had to do. I had to mill this in here in order to fit this trigger pack down in there. And then there's right there the rivet in the actual trigger guard itself right here. You'll have to get rid of that. I drilled that through on the inside, and then you'll have to drill another hole in order to set your screws for your trigger pack and clamp everything down nice and solid. I put a little bit of Loctite on those too, just to make sure they weren't going anywhere. And I mean, I'm going to be the one that ever disassembles it again, so it's like I know what I'm getting into. You know, I'm not screwing somebody over. And that's pretty much it on the lower. But the part that I was telling you about having to finagle everything together, let me go and get an original lower, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so this is an original full auto lower to a PPS-43, not a 4352. You can tell because the rear latch is different. When I pull the other one up, you'll notice the difference. But looking down inside here, you can see how everything interacts with each other. So this is your sear. Your trigger engagement is directly underneath this, and it works like a door stop. All this trigger is doing is just pulling this door stop out of the way. That is it. But if you look right in front of that part, that little piece of steel plays a very important role in making sure that everything in here has spring tension, because the only spring in here is actually this spring right here. So there is a rod that connects back here. This latches into the upper, this spring. Then there's this collar right here that the safety bar, let me show you, yeah, right there, that the safety bar rides on. Then there is this folding like hinge piece right here. And then there is the little piece of stamped steel in front of that. And in order to make it so you don't have to really fuck around and find out trying to get all your pieces to mate up, it makes a lot of sense to keep this rod system right here. That way you don't have to figure out another way to make this work and the safety work and all that sort of thing. But it takes a little bit of ingenuity. So what I ended up doing after I stripped mine apart was everything in there is sitting on top of a plate like this. So it's kind of, I don't know if you're actually going to be able to see it. Well, here, I've got it backwards actually. Yeah, you can see that. So this is how it's sitting in there. You can see the little shoe up front, and there's the shoe right there. And there's the rivets that hold this in that I actually had to drill through. And then the trigger guard rivet is on this as well. And then that little piece of steel is on the end of this, right there. So what I did when I stripped my lower apart was I had to drill out the rivets anyways to get the new trigger group in there. So I took this piece and I cut off that part right there, that piece sticking up, in order to make it so I could still use the original spring and rod to drive the pin that holds the two halves together. I had to cut the spring down, or I had to cut the rod down to size, and I used the same setup where the safety rides on this collar and the spring is over that, and blah blah blah. So that's the way that I ended up making all this work. So for comparison's sake, I'll show you right here how I ended up doing that. Yeah. So you can see the new trigger group fits way far in front of where the original sear would have sit. And so it gave me a lot more room in order to add that piece in there. But all I did was I tack welded it in there. I made sure that it was the right, the right distance and all that sort of thing. I just gave it a few more little tiny TIG beads in order to really hold it in place. And then the original safety went over that collar, no problem. And then you can see right there, it's a hair off. You can feel, or I don't know if you can see it, but it binds a little bit just because it's just a little bit out of center. But that's how I was able to keep the original latching mechanism for this. Now the safety, as a result of this, the safety doesn't work as reliably anymore. So the only thing that I actually use the safety for is to block the charging handle. That is it. I don't trust this safety well enough in order to, make sure that nothing goes off. All I do is I use this, like if I'm transporting it or something like that, I will make sure that that has the safety, locking the charging handle in place. And sometimes, if you're really going to town, like we're out at the range or something like that, because of this modification now, sometimes this will work itself into the safe position while we're shooting it. But that's a small price to pay. And speaking of the differences between the 43 and the 4352, there is the latch for the 4352. You can see that this latch moves down, like it has an L pointing down instead of an L pointing up, because it has to fit in to the space under the stock socket right here. So there goes my hammer, but that's how that fits together. But all in all, that's it. I mean, there's not a whole lot to them. It's just the conversion process kind of sucks. Couple of notes about this. This trigger group, I've finagled with it and screwed around with it, and I still can't figure out a way in order to get this to actually set off 7.62 by 25 surplus. I've put in a heavier spring. I've done God knows what all else to it. It just will not. There's a few times where I can get it to use Romanian surplus, but even then that's kind of iffy. It just doesn't want to work. There's just not enough spring power in order to not only move that firing pin extension, but also have enough oomph to get the firing pin to strike that. Here's actually an example of 7.62 by 25 strikes that it'll do on it. So these are the strikes, and if any of you guys are familiar with 7.62 by 25, usually that's not enough. Only one of these actually went off. You can see it's this middle one right here. It just does not run very well with this really hard primed ammo. But it does strike 9mm hard, like very hard. So there's no problem there. So what I ended up doing, instead of, because the whole reason I built this was because, cheap 7.62 by 25, and I've got about a gazillion rounds of it. Well, that didn't work. What I ended up doing was actually using the 7.63 Mauser, and it works. It runs pretty well. For being very expensive, it does run pretty well. Really good positive ejection. It cycles, it runs very well. I don't know. In the future, I might end up swapping over to the 9mm barrel. But at this point in time, I mean, I've got so much 7.63 Mauser, I might as well just run with it. But yeah, that is the overview of my PPS-43 52 build. That's it right there. This was a lot of fun. If you're getting into building, you want a challenge, I would highly recommend getting one of these. You know, this is something that'll really tickle your brain, and in a fun way. You have to think. You know, there's not just like one right way to do it. There's a bunch of right ways to do it, depending on how much work you want to put in. But yeah, hopefully this helped out anybody that's actually considering or, you know, stuck in the process of building one. Yeah. Enjoy and happy building.